Welcome to New Jersey Politics with Laura Jones. I am Laura Jones, and we are so glad to have you here. Today we're going to be talking about overdevelopment in the Garden State, from congested roadways to new construction. Those who live here in the state are voicing their concerns. Standing by is Assemblyman Gerry Scharfenberger from the 13th Legislative District in Monmouth County to talk about that. First, though, we're going to be talking about education, specifically how public charter schools are making strides in closing the achievement gap in our state's disadvantaged urban areas. Here to discuss this is Harry Lee, President and CEO of the New Jersey Public Charter Schools Association. Harry, thank you so much for joining us. Good to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Laura. It's great to be here. Just trying to stay warm today.
Right? Oh, yeah. Well, let's first talk about some fundamental definitions here of what defines a public charter school and a public school. What's the difference?
Yeah, charter schools are public schools. They are free and open to all students, and there are no tests, there are no entrance exams or other special requirements to go to a charter school. But they also run on performance contracts with the Department of Education. So if a charter school is not performing well academically, operationally, or fiscally, they can be closed. So in that sense, charter schools are the most accountable public schools in the state of New Jersey. And I think the brilliance of the charter idea is that charter schools have greater autonomy on the inputs, such as curriculum, staffing, and budgets, but in exchange, they are held accountable to high expectations and for student outcomes. And we have some of the best charter schools in the country here in New Jersey.
And the reason we have some of the best charter schools is a sad reason, is because the public schools are failing in a lot of our urban areas, correct?
We have excellent public charter schools that are providing excellent education opportunities for families in areas that they may not be getting the greatest education. And we know that one size does not fit all, and that we need to ensure that we are providing educational options that best meet the needs of individual students. And the reason why some of our charter schools are doing such great work is they tend to have longer school days and longer school years than traditional districts. For example, the average charter school day is 70 minutes longer than the traditional school district. And so that equates to 33 additional days every single year for more instructional time for students who may be behind. And so that's one of the reasons why charter schools are doing excellent work for students across the state. Right.
And I want to, let's get into a little bit about the reason why they exist, and talking a little bit about the achievement gap when it comes to New Jersey's public education system. Can you talk a little bit about this achievement gap?
Yeah, we know that New Jersey has one of the top performing education systems in the country, but we also know that not every child is getting the education that is equitable. And we see wide variation between some of the more affluent districts and some of our districts who are economically disadvantaged. And charter schools are mainly in our urban districts and are providing just an excellent education and really eliminating that achievement gap with the rest of the state.
Yeah, I mean, that achievement gap and the urban versus suburban, that's something that went to our state Supreme Court in the Abbott versus Burke, trying to level the playing field between urban and suburban schools. So can you talk a little bit about how charter schools are targeted at closing this gap between these urban communities? Because, again, looking back to the 90s when this went to the U.S. Supreme Court, it wasn't necessarily a matter of putting money into urban public schools. That didn't level the playing field. So how are charter schools fixing that or addressing that more specifically?
We have 86 charter schools throughout the state of New Jersey and 63,000 students, and we are primarily in our urban school districts. 44% of public charter school students are Black, 41% are Latino, 70% come from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, and 10% are students with disabilities. And last month, the New Jersey Department of Education released 2024 statewide assessment scores, and our students of color are knocking it out of the park. Black, Latino, and economically disadvantaged students are outperforming their statewide counterparts in every single grade and subject. And in Newark, for example, which is our largest charter sector, We have 20,000 charter school students in Newark. 80% come from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. And for the second year in a row, they are outperforming the state average in reading. And so if you take a step back and think about that, we have the #1 public education system in the country, and the Newark charter students are outperforming the #1 public education system in the country. And so zip code does not determine the quality of education those students receive. And these are some of the best schools ever created.
Well, can you give us some examples of the strategies or programs that are particularly effective? What is the secret sauce that is working in charter schools, and why can't it be implemented in public schools?
Yeah, in addition to longer school days and longer school years, which I discussed, I really think it starts with our school leaders, right? Every great school, whether they are a district school or a charter school, has an excellent principal who sweats the small stuff and creates a culture of high expectations and a positive school culture. And so I talk to our school leaders every single day, and they are an inspirational group and really drive results. Another big piece is really world-class teacher training and development. And I would say that is the core competency of our schools. Our schools spend more time on developing teachers to become great teachers. And there's just more time within the charter school day in order to do that. And I think just innovation around and flexibility around curriculum, staffing, and budgets. And I'm going to give you an example from the pandemic. I had a kindergartner during when the pandemic broke out in 2020, and it was a struggle because everything was virtual. One of our schools in Newark, Kip, New Jersey, decided to do kindergarten at night because many of their parents were essential workers, they worked in healthcare, they worked as firefighters, police officers, and they needed to go in. And so if you don't have a parent there for a kindergarten, let me tell you, it is a struggle. And so they were able to flip their schedule. We have hardworking, dedicated teachers that were willing to do kindergarten at night. And so these are some of the innovations that are happening. I think a lot of these best practices have been shared, but it's often difficult to adopt if there's challenges around adopting a longer school day and paying your teachers more and all those pieces. And so those innovations are out there.
Okay, all right, yeah. So public schools, you have teachers unions, you have more bureaucratic hoops to jump through. Is that kind of what I'm hearing? As opposed to you're still accountable, if not more so accountable to the state. But is that they're just levels of bureaucracy that don't exist?
Charter schools tend to be smaller, and they also have nonprofit boards of trustees that tend to be more nimble. And so if there is some data that comes out or a curriculum that's not working, they can pivot more quickly. And so when we talk about flexibility and ability to pivot and really using data to drive instruction and change curricula, I would say charter schools are less bureaucratic and can make those changes more quickly.
Yeah, I know there's so much competition to get in, even though there aren't tests to get in. So many people want to be able to go into these charter schools because unlike private schools, the charter schools are free. What are the challenges, though, that charter schools face when it comes to trying to serve communities and disadvantaged communities, and how are these challenges being addressed? Like, whether it's funding disparities or facility constraints.
Absolutely. There are 29,000 students currently on charter school waitlists today. And so parents are voting with their feet. I think the biggest challenge right now for charter schools is really around facilities. Every child deserves a safe, clean, welcoming, and modern school building so that their children can learn. And charter schools do not get facilities money for school construction. We've gotten a little bit of money for emergent projects, but we would love to see more facilities money for charter schools so that they can provide their children with libraries, dedicated gymnasiums, the basics that every child deserves.
Yeah, and when it comes to special ed, you are able to help some with special ed, but that isn't necessarily the best place for students with learning disabilities.
Charter schools must serve students with disabilities. We have many charter schools serving students with disabilities that are over 20%. And so charter schools are doing a lot of work with students with disabilities. And we, in fact, have about 20 of our charter schools giving preference to students with disabilities. And so Charter schools are required as their own local education agency to serve students with disabilities. And if you look at the outcomes, they're doing a great job.
Yeah, it really is incredible. I'm a mother of children who are in special ed, and sometimes it doesn't necessarily take an IEP, a 504. It takes a teacher who cares, and that's what I'm hearing a lot about what you're saying. But there are those who might criticize charter schools and saying, they're siphoning resources from traditional public schools. How would you respond to that?
I would say that our public education resources do not belong to certain institutions. They belong to students and families, and money follows the child into the charter school that they decide to attend. And I reject the idea that charters are siphoning money away, especially over the last several years where this administration, the Murphy administration, and our state legislature has put a lot of money into school funding, especially for our urban communities. And both districts and charters have been able to see per pupil increases. And so we should not be scapegoating charters in our urban districts.
Well, with so many people on the wait list, what are some of your plans to try and accommodate as many of these students as possible? Because there are so many families that are so desperate. And like you said, your zip code should not determine the level or the access to education. I mean, that's free access to public education, but sadly it sometimes does. What are your plans? What would you like to see happen?
Yeah, we want to see growth of charter schools for schools that are high performing, right? And so charter schools have contracts with the State Department of Education. They decide if charter schools can grow. They decide if new charter schools can open. And so what we want to see is a merit-based process where charter schools are allowed to grow based upon the merits of their application and their track record of success, because we do have 29,000 students on wait lists today. We also have a federal grant here at the Public Charter Schools Association that we are able to give to our schools that are able to grow. And so we are helping schools in that way as well.
Just final thoughts. Do you have advice or words that you would like to leave, whether it's with policymakers or other educators who want to replicate that success of charter schools when it comes to closing that achievement gap across all schools?
Yeah, the message I would want to leave is that until every child in the state of New Jersey has access to a great public school that meets their individual needs, our job is not yet done. We know that public charter schools strengthen communities, and we need to learn from one another. And this is not about an us versus them. This is about making sure that every single child in the state of New Jersey, regardless of where they live, gets access to the education that they deserve.
Harry Lee, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Laura. Great being here.
New Jersey packs a lot of wow into every winter getaway.
Wow.
So come and get your wow on till you're all warm and fuzzy inside. New Jersey, it's one wow after another, after another, after another. You get it. Find your wow at visitnj.org. Little state, lotta.
Today, we dive into the issue of overdevelopment in New Jersey. It is the country's most densely populated state with crowded roads and changes to the landscape. People living here are increasingly speaking out. Joining me now is Assemblyman Gerry Scharfenberger from Monmouth County's 13th Legislative District. Assemblyman, good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Laura. Great to see you.
Yeah. Well, we know New Jersey is famously the most densely populated state. Tell me, how bad is it getting?
Well, it's one of those issues that everybody has in front of their face every day. And I can't walk into a supermarket without somebody coming up about some development that they think is over the top and going to just exacerbate existing traffic and school crowding and everything else. So this is something, and it's not limited to one part of the state. This is something that's going on across the state. And there's a couple of drivers that are really problematic that we feel we have to really take a look at as legislators.
Well, what are those drivers?
But one of the things that I think is the biggest driver are the housing mandates that are coming down from Trenton. We just got the fourth round numbers for affordable housing, and some of the numbers are absolutely staggering. When you think of these small towns with very, very minor infrastructure getting enormous quotas of buildings that they have to satisfy, lest they get sued in court over it. And we're very concerned about it, and the towns really don't know what to do. So I think as legislators, we should be able to attack that first to give towns the flexibility to develop as they see fit, not as how the state sees fit.
Well, I mean, and it's certainly affecting character of communities, but the driving force again behind it goes back decades to the Mount Laurel decision back in the 70s. And what that led, if we want to give our viewers a little bit of a history, it more or less led to housing quotas in every New Jersey town. So can you explain a little bit about how these quotas work and why this Mount Laurel decision, why it remains so controversial?
Sure. And the way the Mount Laurel decision initially came down was to prohibit exclusionary zoning. So somehow it is morphed from prohibiting ordinances that keep down numbers or keep people out, the exclusionary zoning, to quotas that towns are responsible for building. And keep in mind that to subsidize each one of these units, according to one of the preeminent COA attorneys in the state, costs the citizens of New Jersey $162,000 per unit to subsidize. So not only is it environmentally devastating, but it's financially very, very difficult for the state with the financial and the affordability problems that New Jersey has to accommodate.
Yeah, and COA is the Council on Affordable Housing. There used to be a time where towns could actually sell their credits, like if you lived in a town like Lambertville, you could sell some of your credits to Trenton, where they had a little bit more of the infrastructure. So, again, can we talk about, why cities, the urban areas like Newark and Camden, which have the infrastructure for development, why aren't they subject to the quotas while smaller towns, your particular district, are required?
Well, that's one of the perplexing things that we don't understand. If this is really, really about creating affordable housing, why are you excluding certain municipalities, especially municipalities that have plenty of vacant buildings and vacant blocks even, where development would make sense and they would love the development there? They have no quotas. It only seems to be the suburban and some of the rural towns that get these big numbers. Now, keep in mind, a lot of the municipalities like Newark, like Camden, like Patterson, have public transportation. They have infrastructure in place. They have certainly the need for this sort of development and the desire for it. So that would be a huge, huge win to be able to identify areas that could accommodate this development without it being so destructive to the environment.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about your district, which is Monmouth Beach, Seabright? You're facing significant housing quotas, and when it comes to the environmental and infrastructure challenges, not to mention, the strain that it puts on the schools and roads and such. Can you talk a little bit more about that and what you're specifically looking at?
Sure. And I get calls from local municipal officials about the quotas that they're getting, and everybody says the same thing, that there's no way that they can accommodate this in their small town. And the towns you mentioned, like Seabright, Little Silver, Monmouth Beach, they're about a mile, maybe a mile and a half in total area. And they're getting quotas that would have them build 45 to 47 units. Now, just to explain the way this works, 1/5 or 20% of every housing development has to be set aside, deed restricted affordable housing. So to get 45 affordable units, you would have to build almost 250 units just to satisfy that. These towns are almost built out. And do we really want to eliminate every bit of open space and exacerbate? A lot of these towns are along the shore. They have chronic flooding problems as it is. So you're adding to the flooding problems, your demand on services, overwhelming these small 18th century infrastructures that were not made for this sort of density. Right. And, on another level, do we really want to urbanize these small towns that have such a magnificent character and have such historic integrity? These are all things that would be at risk by forcing these huge numbers of housing into these small municipalities.
I mean, and how do you strike that balance? Because, affordability, it's so expensive to buy in New Jersey, and we want people to be able to buy and live in their communities. But can you talk a little bit about the fiscal implications of this overdevelopment for local taxpayers? I mean, we pay locally to fund our schools. And again, if you're bringing all of these, these new homes, the strain on the schools, the strain on the roadways, are we getting money from Trenton to be able to offset, or is this coming out of the local taxpayer dollars?
Well, if they don't have a housing authority, some of the bigger towns have a housing authority where they do have some money, but the ones that don't have that, they're on the hook for it, to pay for it, if they choose to do the units standalone. Otherwise, you have to make a deal with a developer to really increase the density. So it's sort of pick your poison how you want to accommodate these numbers. Now, there was a study done some years back that determined that developed areas, for every dollar that they bring in, it costs the municipality $1.27 in increased upgrades to infrastructure, increased services, demands on the schools, and so forth. So more development does not necessarily mean more revenue. It means more stress on services. So this is a very, very difficult thing to navigate.
Right. And I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And the builders aren't on the hook for having to provide that. There are, some areas where developers will come in and they will be responsible for a share, but that is not necessarily the case when it comes to
Right.
affordable housing.
Right. Not every development will have an affordable component to it. There may be some where you just can't get this sort of density for a variety of reasons, maybe environmental restrictions or so forth. So these are the kind of things where this one size fits all mandate that comes down from Trenton is really, really destroying the character of so many small towns and medium-sized towns around the state. And this is something that New Jersey prides itself in. We can't be the ones to end that.
Yeah. Well, can we talk about, New Jersey does. I mean, they love their towns. They love their municipalities. That's why we are expensive, because they don't want to regionalize. You don't want to share services because they like their local school districts. They like their local law enforcement. So it's always kind of a push and give and take when it comes to affordability to begin with on a good day. What steps, though, can the state take to perhaps alleviate the pressure that these housing quotas are having on these small towns without compromising the need for affordable housing?
Well, there's a couple of things. And one of the things, too, and I should point out that I'm a trustee on Habitat for Humanity on the board. So I'm very, very active in creating affordable housing. And I think actually that's the way to go, because these organizations that provide affordable housing have used no taxpayer dollars. So there's no strain on the taxpayers. They typically rehab existing buildings, so it won't be additions to the infrastructure. So there's a lot of good in working with these private organizations. The other thing, too, is we have to stop with the forced mandates and these enormous numbers. We pay the highest property taxes in the country, no question about it. So the least we can do is allow towns the discretion to develop as they see fit. They know what they can bear. They know what their infrastructure, what their services, what their budgets can bear as far as new development, if any. And we have to understand we can't turn every small town into some of the big urban areas that we have existing here. They're apples and oranges, and you can't create one out of the other. So the other thing, too, is address the 900-pound gorilla in the room, the highest property taxes. I know many people, and you may be in the same boat, Laura, where they pay more in property taxes than their mortgage payment. So the cost of living and the affordability of housing has a lot to do with property taxes in this state.
Right, especially for the older people who have paid off their homes and their property taxes continue to grow. And then, one other thing I wanted to talk about before we close out this segment is also just the dynamics that this puts on a town, because issues like this, they get really sensitive because you don't want to seem that you are insensitive to providing affordable housing. And sometimes that turns into a terrible political debate, and it turns into us versus them mentality of, oh, well, you just don't want a certain type of fiscal profile moving to your community. And that isn't what it's about.
Absolutely not. In fact, we welcome it if it's done right. And as I mentioned, the private organizations who've been so great in doing this, and towns can get creative on their own with rehabbing existing buildings. I think bringing back regional contribution agreements that you mentioned before, where a town could sell half of their quota to another town that's more willing or more able to accommodate this in the region. So that was a great program. In fact, when I was mayor in Middletown, we embarked on that in several cases, and it really worked very well. So there are things you can do, and I think if we cool the political rhetoric, we can get to an answer without devastating the environment or devastating these towns' characters.
That's what happens, is the political rhetoric just really amps up during these types of discussions. But we thank you for taking the time to talk to us and explain things from your lens. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Laura.
Yep. And that'll do it for today. I'm Laura Jones. Thanks so much for watching New Jersey Politics. We look forward to seeing you back here next time.
New Jersey packs a lot of wow into every winter getaway.
Wow.
Find your wow at visitnj.org. New Jersey, little state, lot of wow.